14 Bannerman Road is where Sarah Jane Smith lives.
And 14 Bannerman Road is the name of my podcast about it. This time, The Mark of the Berserker Parts 1 and 2, both written by newcomer Joseph Lidster and directed by Joss Agnew, with Part 1 first broadcast on the 3rd of November 2008, and Part 2 first broadcast on the 10th of November 2008. All I have to say about this one is that I remember it existing, but not so much its plot. I think I most vividly recall the image of Clyde's dad with bulging blue CGI veins, so we'll see how they stood up. Without further ado, let's begin. We start off with a whoosh to school. I'm unsure if they're filming at a different school now. I don't want to slander them if they aren't, but, I could be wrong. It could just be a different side of the building, but it looks unfamiliar to me. We're in detention, and I think I recognise the teacher, and also one of the kids in detention is one who was in the clown episode. There's a new kid, not new to the school, but, new to the show. He's called Jacob. He's sitting a bit more on his own in the detention room, and apparently he got into a fight earlier, and the teacher says, that's not like you, and he's not making eye contact, because instead he's looking at his palm, which has a blue symbol on it. The kid from the clown episode, who's called Steve, calls him a freak, which prompts Jacob to sort of get up and confront him. His acting is a little bit flat. It's just sort of, hey, stop, I'm warning you, don't call me a freak, but sure, whatever. And then, Steve keeps pushing it. Eventually Jacob shouts at him to shut up, and when he shouts, his voice is sort of augmented to be unnaturally deep, and Ronnie hears it from outside the classroom. I don't know what Ronnie's doing, because presumably this is after school. And, they're in detention, everybody else has gone home, but Ronnie's walking along the corridor, she overhears this. And inside the classroom, after Steve has been told to shut up, he can no longer speak. And, when the teacher tells him to stop messing around, Jacob tells the teacher to be quiet. Teacher can no longer speak either. Ronnie sees all this going on through the sort of little window thing they've got in the door. And Jacob tells everyone in the room, which is just, everyone I mentioned plus two other kids, to stay where they are and be quiet. And he's quite, happy about this power that he's got over them. But then he notices the blue mark on his palm starts spreading down the veins in his arm. And in a panic, he runs off to the loo to try and wash it off, as if that's going to do anything. Ronnie enters this detention room to see everybody rooted to the spot, silently mouthing for help. And the blue spreads right up the veins in Jacob's neck to his face. His eyes turn a very pale blue, and into the mirror in the loo, he sort of shouts, "No!" and then roll titles. After the titles roll, Ronnie runs in. She runs to the door of the loo, but it's a men's loo, so there's just a thing in this show about even if a emergency's going on, you don't go into that loo. And she sort of starts banging on the door as Jacob rips the medallion from, a medallion, this is the first we've seen of it, from around his neck. And he begs it to make it stop, all of it, please. And then we see the people in the detention room are all suddenly able to move and talk again. And they all just flee. Even the teacher, they all just run out of that room and just leg it and go. Which I've just realised now, we don't resolve that. I don't know what they think happened there. But they've all essentially been possessed, and we have no idea, what the follow-up to that is. We kind of forget about them by the end of the episode, because there's a lot more important things to focus on. But reading that back, I thought, yeah, I have no idea what happens to them. Anyway, Jacob chucks a medallion, which is sort of glowing, and it has a symbol on it, which is like the symbol that was on his palm. He chucks it onto the floor, exits the loo, and then Ronnie goes in and picks up the medallion, and is sort of looking at it, and then gets a call from her dad saying that he's waiting in the car to take her home. And so she puts the medallion into her pocket, and we see that Jacob hasn't completely gone. He watches her do that. We cut to Sarah Jane dropping off Luke at Clyde's for a sleepover that Clyde is insisting isn't a sleepover because we're not girls. You're just staying over, it's not a sleepover. But Luke is, of course, going, but I'm sleeping over at your house, and it's sort of his logical thing. But Clyde says, I can't tell if you're being serious right now, and it prompts Luke to imply that he might have just been acting like that just to tease him, which is quite cute. Chloe's mum says that Sarah Jane has a proper job because she's saying, "Oh, I can't hang around. I can't come in and have some tea. Sorry." But she sort of directs us at Clyde because apparently Clyde wants to be the next Banksy. We don't get much of a follow up on that. It like we get some hints in this about he's good at art and things, but we don't get much of a payoff to that in this episode. So sort of keep that in our minds for future episodes and see if it does actually come up at all. But the reference to Banksy just makes you think Banksy's been around for a while, huh? Anyway, Clyde's mum asks Sarah Jane about going to Tarminster, which makes Sarah Jane act a little bit like it's a lie that she just made up to sort of cover up what she's really doing. And she's sort of like, "Oh right, yes, Tarminster. Yes, I'm definitely going to Tarminster." Apparently, Tarminster was a location that was made up for old Doctor Who. Don't know much more about it besides that, but it's nice to reference that, isn't it? And Sarah Jane says that she's doing a story on hospital hygiene, which prompts Clyde's mum to mention MRSA, which may have been all in the news at that point, but I can't be sure. But it's probably one of them little topical things that makes you go, "Oh, it's all tied into the real world." Doctor Who, especially under Russell T Davies, would do Doctor Light episodes, and this seems to be a Sarah Jane Light episode where she can go and record something on her own simultaneously so they can get things done a bit quicker. So this is essentially them writing her out of this episode. She's going to Tarminster to do a report on hospital hygiene, or, at some point we'll find out what it is that she's actually doing. So Clyde's mum has got Clyde into cooking, and she says, "It's spag a bolla night." She says that, right? I wouldn't have chosen to say that, but she says that. And then we get quite a good transition, actually, from, "Right, boys, food," into Rani asking Haresh what takeaway they're having. And then Haresh is asking, "Well, what's wrong with my cooking?" Which we know he's quite bad at cooking because I mentioned that at the end of the last episode. It's all very nice. The last sort of nice transition like that I remember was the tea in episode 0 of series 1, where he's like, I'd rather have some tea, and then being poured a cup of tea, and it's just a nice transition between scenes. So, it's nice to have a sweet transition like that back. Haresh says that he doesn't like Chinese food, but when Ronnie sort of pushes it, saying, "Oh, please, can we have Chinese?" he suddenly says, "Yes, we should have Chinese food." And when Ronnie's like, but wait, but you just said you don't like it," he sort of, in a creepily cheery way, says, "You said we should have Chinese." And she notices that something is up, and she pulls a medallion out of her pocket. And I really like this scene, because it starts with a neat transition. It leads into a callback to the previous episode, but then that is used to introduce the point of this episode. It's just really sweet. I just like that. I appreciate that a lot. So Haresh sees the medallion, and when he asks what it is, she gives it a proper test because she says it's a hamster. And he just fully believes her and starts asking why she's got a hamster instead. And she goes, "Oh, this is brilliant." And then he goes, "What's brilliant?" And she goes, "I'm telling you, this is brilliant." And he's like, "Yes, this is brilliant." And he's just fully goes along with everything she says, like in the school, like with Jacob when he was controlling his classmates and teacher. So, maybe slightly giddy with power, she makes him start hopping around, and then gets him to impersonate Bianca from EastEnders, which it's just very sort of the time him going, "Ricky," it's like 2008. That's what's on TV right now. She's watching, but it confirms that EastEnders exists in the Doctor Who universe, which is extra funny because Ace Batty, who plays Haresh, 2 years on from this episode, will go on to be in EastEnders. So she does all sorts of things. She makes him impersonate a lion, and he's sort of crawling around on the floor and roaring. And then she says, "Okay, stop. You would die if you could see yourself right now." And he asks if she wants him to die. And suddenly the music is all serious. And it's a bit much, but it's obviously how they're showing the great responsibility side of this great power. So she just goes, "Okay," and makes him forget about everything that's just happened, stops controlling him. he asks why he's on the floor, from the lion impersonation, and she says, "Oh, you dropped some change. Don't worry about it. You were going to order some pizza, which is nice. Don't make him get the Chinese he doesn't like. You've learned your responsibility now. Get pizza instead." Um, and so very tentatively and sort of confused about this random gap in his memory, he does order the pizza, while Ronnie looks at her palm, which now has this same symbol that Jacob's had on it. Somebody's at the door. Ronnie answers. It's Jacob. He asks to see her hand, and Ronnie demands to know what is going on. And we see the mark on Ronnie's hand is just fading slightly, and Jacob says that it will fade if you stop using the medallion. And he says that at first he just used it to make people like him, and he sort of asks, is that really so bad? And he says that he found it at school in a bit where they're laying some new pipes. It was just laying in the mud, it had been dug up. It has a cord attached to it, and from the age of it that we learn, you'd imagine that would have rotted away, but hey, maybe Jacob added that cord himself. He says that the more you use it, the more it talks to you, and he thinks that it's probably evil. He wants rid of it. So Ronnie looks up at 13 Bannerman Road across the road, and she says, "I know somebody who can help us out. I know somebody who can get rid of it." How convenient to the plot that this is the one time that she's gone away, huh? So Ronnie goes into the attic. Sarah Jane has left post-it notes stuck around saying, "If it's alien, leave it." Ronnie ignores them, and she goes, "Mr. Smith, I need you." "Mr. Smith, I need you." And we get Mr. Smith's answer phone message saying that Sarah Jane has shut him down while she's away, and that if she wants to leave a message, they'll get back to her when Sarah Jane returns. He comes this close to saying, "Please leave a message after the beep." Right? It's done in the sort of style of an answer phone. And I understand Sarah Jane not wanting the gang getting into trouble unsupervised, right? But while it is a massive coincidence that when she's gone away, stuff starts happening, that's still a possibility that she needs to account for. And surely having Mr. Smith available for guidance and help and sort of a limited supervision from his point on the wall, surely that would be better. It seems like a bad move from Sarah Jane here to sort of deny them that resource. So Ronnie just hangs the medallion up in the attic and says, "Okay, I guess it's going to be a quiet weekend then." And we get some sinister noise and a shot of the medallion glowing to emphasize quite how wrong she's going to be. And then we get a transition sort of cut from the medallion to the moon because they're both circular. But it would have been better, it would have been a better shot if the moon was a full moon, because it's only a half moon, so it doesn't really line up. But hey. And we see Luke and Clyde definitely not sleeping at the sleepover. And Clyde's mum, who we learn is called Carla, is saying them, you really should get to sleep now. And Clyde is being cheeky, and it's all the usual business. There are plenty of drawings around. This is sort of where they pick up again on the fact that Clyde is good at art. And there's a bit later where Clyde's dad turns up. Spoilers, we know this. And asks him what he does, and then he goes on about all the sort of alien stuff. But I thought he was just going to tell him about drawing. He's like, "Oh, I've never told anybody about this." And we're like, "Yeah, you've never told anybody about your art. That's the first we've heard about it is in this episode." But he just doesn't bring it up again. So this is sort of, you think they'd do it in a 3, wouldn't you? They do they set it up and then they reinforce it and then the payoff. But you just sort of get it set up and reinforced, and there's no payoff to the fact that Clyde is really good at art. But anyway, there's drawings of Maria, and drawings of Luke, and Luke asks if Clyde did them, and they're very good. And Luke says that he wishes he could draw, which is interesting. That when he was made from all the other children, he didn't pick up any sort of skill for art from any of them. And then Clyde says, "Oh, I'll teach you, my son," which is a bit of a weird choice of words. But it leads into Luke saying, "Oh, thanks, Dad," and then he apologizes because he wonders if it wasn't nice of him, considering the whole situation with Clyde's father. But Clyde's cool with it. He says it's old news. We know from the preview of this episode it's not going to be old news for much longer. Also, this might be Luke learning from when he called Lance the Corporal in the Good Luck episode, and then Lance went missing, so it's sort of Luke wanting to be a bit more careful about what he says now, which is nice. They eventually fall asleep. In the morning time, Carla's making breakfast, listening to Grace Kelly by Mika on the radio. The doorbell goes, Clyde answers, and "Hello, son." It's his dad. We get another nice transition of the song continuing to play as we reveal that Rani is also eating breakfast and listening to the same radio station. Rani notices now, by the morning time, that the mark on her hand is completely gone. Haresh asks her if she's going to go and see Luke, and she says, yeah, I'll go and see Clyde as well. And he's disapproving, but he says, I'm not going to police who you're friends with. You should just be careful. Now we know she doesn't need to be careful because Clyde's lovely, but okay, sure, whatever. Clyde's dad, who's called Paul, says he had business in the area, so he's popped in to say hello. We find out that it's been 5 years since he left. He says he lives in Germany now, so it's hard to make it more frequent. He's polite enough, but he makes himself at home too quickly. And Luke is sort of standing there a bit awkwardly as Clyde says that, first he told himself that his dad had just gone on holiday, and then when he finally accepted that he'd gone, he blamed his mum because he thought that she must have driven him away, and he got into trouble at school. He got expelled from a school, and Paul just sort of brushes it off and goes, yeah, all right, sorry, mate. And it's clear that him being gone was probably for the best. But he says that he's here now because he wasn't a good dad, and at least now he wants to get to know Clyde. Carla says, no, I'm not allowing this. Paul says, here, look, he's 16, he's not a kid. Let him choose if he wants to chat to me himself. Clyde agrees, I'm not a kid, and I do want to talk to you, Paul. And Carla, while she's unhappy about this, she lets him do so. So Paul says, all right, let me take you on a day out. Luke says, don't worry about me, I'll be all right here with Carla, when Clyde asks him. And Clyde makes Paul wait outside while he gets dressed so that he doesn't have any chance of upsetting Carla. Not before revealing that Paul actually got his age wrong and that he's 15, not 16, which is a bad sign, but there we go. We see the medallion continuing to glow away in 13 Bannerman Road. Rani draws a picture of it on a takeaway menu from last night, and then she asks her dad if she should wait for Sarah Jane to come back and help her or try and work on a report for the school newspaper herself. And Haresh says, of course, you should try and work it out yourself. And then she takes it as an endorsement to try and figure out more about the medallion. Though, of course, he probably wouldn't say that if he really knew what was going on. So, Ronnie, you've really misled your poor father here. Rani says she's popping over to 30 Bannerman Road to water Sarah Jane's plants, and then she immediately phones Luke, saying, grab Clyde, come and meet me at the school. So we've obviously gone from a Friday to a Saturday. That was sort of, the sleepover and everything. So school is closed now, but, come and meet me at the school when nobody's around. We'll examine where all the pipes were. We'll try and figure out more about this. And Luke explains Clyde's out with his dad. His dad's turned up. So we can't bring Clyde along. But Clyde goes to the park with his dad. It's very awkward because Paul has no idea what Clyde likes. So Clyde just cuts to the chase, asks, why did you leave? And they've got a sort of stock audio background noise for just we're outside in a park. But I don't think it's quite long enough because I think I hear it loop. And it's a slightly awkward cut and then loop as it plays in the background. Just takes me out of the scene a little bit, but it's fine. Paul says, well, hey, I stopped getting on with your mum. It wasn't your fault, Clyde. Clyde says, hey, look, I never thought it was my fault. But you ran off with mum's sister, Mel. And he says, yeah, okay, I messed up. But I never forgot about you, Clyde. He shows that he carries a picture of baby Clyde around. The picture looks nothing like Clyde, but in the story we sort of, believe that it is. Wonder who the kid they've got for this picture is. Anyway, maybe he was mentioned in the credits, so I'm not sure. I didn't check. Luke says, Carla, I'm gonna go and see Rani. We have a nice moment of Carla asking if he wants to bring some sandwiches, and then Luke reassures her, hey, look, Clyde's gonna be okay. And Carla says, look, just don't forget about Sarah Jane if your dad ever turns up. Which of course we know won't happen, but it's sweet anyway. It does make me think, how did we resolve the thing in the finale of Series 1 where everybody thought that the Slovene were Luke's parents? Because it was all over the news. There's a lot of things you just think about that don't get resolved, and we just have to assume that Mr. Smith has done some hacking in the background and now it's all fine. At the park, Clyde asks Paul if he speaks German. He says he does, and Clyde says, okay, can you teach me some? And, we get the sort of very basics. We get, ich heiße Paul Langer, ich heiße Clyde Langer. I'm not sure exactly if that means that Paul isn't actually fluent, or if he's just really dumbing it down for Clyde, and because chucking you in at the deep end of learning a new language isn't the best way to learn a new language. But Clyde picks it up quick enough. It would be weird if he didn't. And Paul asks Clyde what he gets up to, and he says, "I mostly hang out with my mates." And Paul says, "Oh yeah, like Luke, he's a bit quiet and a bit geeky." And Clyde says, "Yeah, he's geeky, but he's cool." And Paul says, "I've got a mate like him back in Germany. I keep him around because he makes me look good." And then that gets Clyde very defensive because he says, "I'm not using Luke to make me look good. I'm genuinely friends with him." Clyde, leave your dad. He's not worth it, right? He's not worth it, is he? And when Paul asks what else he gets up to, he says, "Well, there's something else that I do, but I don't really tell anyone about it." And this is where I think they're going to pay off the art, but they don't, because when Paul pushes him further, saying we shouldn't have secrets, before rejecting a phone call from Mel, Clyde reveals that he saves the world. For goodness sake, Clyde, don't you have a rule? Wasn't it one of the rules? I know we break the rules a lot, but wasn't one of the rules that we don't tell anybody about what they do? So Ronnie and Luke are looking around where all the pipes were at school. We've glossed over how they actually got into the school site, but sure. They don't find anything, which leads Luke to suggest, well, hey, if you can't get Mr. Smith to help us, maybe I can. So how about we go back to 13 Bannerman Road and try that? Clyde mentions Slovene and Sontarans to Paul, and while Paul is trying not to say, "I don't believe you," it's clear that he doesn't believe him. He asks if it's a trading card thing, and so Clyde says, "Okay, I'll prove it." For goodness sake, Clyde, alright, you've told him about it, but he doesn't believe you. This is your opportunity now to back out and just pretend it's a joke. He doesn't believe you. Don't take him to the attic to prove it. I'd understand Clyde's willingness to sell out the gang for his dad's affection maybe a bit more if his dad was showing that he'd actually changed, but his dad is still, not the greatest guy. So, But there we go. So they get to 13 Bannerman Road. They get the key from under the flower pot. For goodness sake, Sarah Jane, this is the third time. You need to make your house so much more secure. Oh my goodness. And then Clyde shows his dad the attic. Just stop, please, Clyde, please stop. And Paul asks what the stuff is. He wonders how much he could sell it for on eBay, because of course he does. Clyde tells him all this is alien. Clyde, please. And Paul says, "Oh yeah, is it alien like them Dalek things then?" So Daleks are public knowledge at this point. We don't have time to get into the canon of Doctor Who and when humanity forgets and remembers about aliens and when they get wiped with the reset of the universe and everything. We just don't. So at this point, Daleks are apparently public knowledge. So cool. It doesn't have any bearing on the story really. It's just a neat little nod to a Doctor Who episode that's happened recently. So cool. Recently at time of broadcast. And Clyde proves that the tech is alien by showing some sort of holographic projection message type thing that they've sent to Maria. I'm not sure exactly how it works. I guess Maria has another one in America, and that can send and receive them. They could just Skype. They really could just Skype. This alien tech is not more advanced than Skype. It just broadcasts a hologram in front of you. But just have a webcam and a screen. It's fine. It's really fine. It's far less complicated than this. But anyway, in the recording, Luke is saying that he misses Maria. So Clyde calls him a soft boy, which is dangerously close to a homophobic slur for me. But I mean, I've recommended this show in the past. I mean, ideally, the version of the show that I recommend to you is one that has just some minor tweaks to make it slightly more acceptable. But I mean, that's to be expected when you look at things from a decade plus ago, I guess. I mean, that's literally what progress is. We're getting better than the stuff we were showing 10 years ago. So cool. Whatever. It's not remotely as bad as Torchwood, so okay, we'll let that pass on by. Um, and so Paul, he's now got the proof. This is alien technology. It does holograms and projections and things. So apparently that's alien enough for him. Um, and he says, I thought just the government and the military had all this stuff, but I am very surprised that it's also in this attic, and my son is doing all this. You shouldn't know about this, Paul. You really shouldn't. Especially because it's clear that Paul is interested in the potential profits of selling all the alien tech. And he says, I'm proud of you, Clyde, for achieving so much. But it's clear that he doesn't appreciate the alien life and alien worlds in the same way that Clyde does. So he asks about everyone involved, and he's like, "So it's you and Luke and this Sarah Jane, right?" And Clyde just goes, "Yeah." And they ignore Rani. I don't know why, but they just ignore Rani. Um, and and Clyde says, "Yeah, it's also this Mr. Smith." And he sort of turns around to look at the wall, and he's like, "So this is Mr. Smith, and when you want to activate him, you say Mr. Smith, and then you say something else that I'm not going to say because then that would activate him, and he'd probably be a bit angry because I'm not meant to right now because Sarah Jane's away." And sort of while he's going on about this, and he's got his back turned, Paul notices the medallion hanging up, and we think it sort of calls to him a bit, and he picks it up and he puts it in his pocket without Clyde knowing, and they leave. Haresh, who's come out to put the pizza boxes from last night into the bin, sees Clyde leaving 30 Bannerman Road and asks what's going on. So Clyde introduces his dad to Haresh and is like, this is my head teacher, Mr. Chandra, this is my dad, etc. And he says, sorry, Mr. Chandra, I was just watering the plants for Sarah Jane, which of course he doesn't buy because that was Rani's excuse. And then when he starts getting a bit more suspicious, Paul says, "No, listen, mate, just drop it." His voice is augmented to be deeper than it is already, and Haresh physically drops the pizza boxes. So Paul says, with all that pizza, you're not setting a good example for my son. And then Haresh says, "Excuse me, I do plenty of exercise." And Paul sort of sarcastically looks at the pizza boxes on the floor and says, "Yeah, you should exercise, mate." And then Haresh does. And he starts jogging on the spot. And Paul twigs that he's doing everything that he tells him to. So he says, "Hey, jogging's for wimps. Do some push ups instead." And Haresh does. And it's quite funny that all this happens to Haresh. Like, Rani's just controlled him last night. He's come out, now Paul's controlling him. But you do feel quite sorry for him. So Luke and Rani finally turn up. They've got back from the school. And Rani wonders what's going on immediately because when she sees her dad doing press ups on the ground, Clyde and Paul sort of laughing at him. She asks if they've been up in the attic, and they say yes, which of course angers Rani and Luke quite rightfully. Rani asks if Paul has taken something, and Clyde gets very defensive, saying, "My dad's not a thief," despite the evidence of Haresh being controlled right in front of them on the driveway. So Paul says he's fed up with this and takes Clyde away, leaving Haresh exercising there on the drive and Rani and Luke very troubled. And he finally hits this sort of true evil using the pendant on Clyde to make him forget about those two. I want you to forget about them completely. And when he waves a sarcastic goodbye, we see this blue mark on the palm of his hand. And finally, at the end of episode 1, we have our big main problem to solve. I must admit, though, I do quite like how much time they dedicated to Clyde and his dad. I think that rushing it would have been very bad because it's quite a sensitive topic that his dad has left him 5 years ago and has just turned up again. There's a lot of good emotion from Clyde, especially at the point where his dad just turns up on the doorstep, and the whole thing about having a black absent father, that is a harmful stereotype. I think what they're doing here is essentially the least harmful version of it, maybe. Like, Clyde doesn't blame himself. Everyone here sort of is quite mature about it, except Paul. But that's the point. It does serve a relevance to the plot because Clyde wanting to gain his favor is what gets him to the medallion. But it could be better, couldn't it? It could be. I don't think it's necessarily offensive, but I think it's a missed opportunity to have done something that could have come across more positively. And maybe it's a super quick turnaround of these episodes as I'm falling back onto easy stereotypes, because it's quicker to do than innovating something that takes more time. Maybe they had no idea of the impact of it; they were just completely ignorant to what potential harm they could have caused. But I can sit here inventing excuses all day based on nothing. None of them are really any justification. There is a bit of an issue there. So, that's just my 2 pence on the issue from a very white, has a father who's present sort of perspective, completely unqualified to really talk about any of this. So I do encourage you to seek out somebody more informed than me, who's coming from a better standpoint to get a better evaluation of exactly the themes of this episode and if they're sort of bad or not. But it's not the best thing. But in my opinion, it could be worse. I guess it's no, it's not like the sexism of Cyberwoman or something like that. On sort of on that scale. But I'm not really sure. So on to part two. We start with Clyde and Paul walking down the street. Paul asks Clyde, "Do you want to go back to Luke and Ronnie?" As if he doesn't know that he's just made Clyde forget about them, which is a bit odd. But when Clyde doesn't know who they are, he says, "All right, it doesn't matter." So maybe this is him showing a little bit of some slight remorse about it. Clyde actually notices the medallion, asks what it is. Paul says, "Don't worry about it." And so Clyde doesn't worry about it. He suggests, "Hey, Clyde, maybe I should take you away from a bit." And when Clyde says, "Well, I should phone Mum about this," Paul says, "No, you don't need to phone Mum about this." And so he doesn't. And then Paul notices that the mark on his palm is becoming more prominent. Ronnie and Luke decide to risk Sarah Jane being angry at them and just call, because at this point they need her help. And we cut to Sarah Jane, who actually is in a hospital, dressed up as a nurse, chasing a big slug kind of thing called a Travast Polong around. Don't know where anybody else in this hospital is. And it's really weird that they've made like this whole CGI slug for like 2 seconds of screen time. Doesn't appear again in this episode, but Sarah Jane's phone is off, so no reply from her. So instead, Luke and Ronnie decide to call Maria and Alan. They've got a whole set for their house in Washington and everything, and you know what they do? They literally Skype them. So, what was the point in the alien hologram tech if they've just proved, right? I was going to be like, you can Skype them. We had Skype in 2008, right? Yes, we literally had video calling in 2008. Why don't you use that instead of your weird alien hologram thing? They're the same thing. It's just swings and roundabouts, isn't it? It's no better. It's not. Brilliant. Anyway, it's Ronnie's first time chatting to Maria. Ronnie says that all the aliens and stuff are uber cool, and then when Luke says, "Hey, right, so sorry, Maria, to cut you off, but we actually need to chat to Alan." Alan goes, "Oh yeah, that's cool. That's uber cool," which is cute. I've missed Alan. I really have. And Ronnie shows her drawing of the pendant medallion thing that she was drawing on that takeaway menu, and says, "Alan, what we need you to do, right, is hack Unit and see what you can find out about this." Alan installs computers in schools and now he's hacking Unit. The only explanation for this is that he is a spy. Please give me Adventures of Alan Jackson Super Spy, because what else? Okay, we don't hack Unit. Hack Unit. Okay, sure, he can do it. Okay, right. We see Paul and Clyde at a car dealership. Paul's getting the guy there to just give them a Porsche for free. Clyde's pretty happy about this. And Paul starts noticing the veins are crawling up his arm. Fair play, those ones look pretty good. Actually, they look like they're under the skin. They look pretty cool. Maybe the low resolution of it is hiding some crimes, working in its favour, but I like it. Looks good, that one. So Luke tries calling Clyde. Clyde answers, but of course he doesn't know who Luke is. So when Luke says, "Look, listen, I am your best friend. Okay, I know you don't remember me, but I'm your best friend. I need you to listen to me." Clyde goes, "Nah, you're a freak. Get lost." Hangs up on him. So they're not getting through to Clyde at all. Haresh is still out on the driveway doing push-ups, like properly sweating. But by this point, Ronnie's gone out to give him some water, but she's just had to leave like the glass of water on the ground by him because he like physically can't interact with it. Like all he's doing is push-ups. Ronnie's getting very worried about him. Um, so by this point, Alan has just hacked into Unit. The screen and like all his typing and everything is just hacking for entertainment, not for accuracy. Fair enough. Entertain me then. Do your crazy wibbly like matrix numbers and stuff all over your screen. It's fine. It's funny. Um, and he's found a photo from 1940 in Unit's archive, and zooms and enhances it because of course he does. And we see that there's a person with veins bulging all over them, and their eyes are sort of very pale, and there is a mark that is clearly visible on their palm. So Clyde and Paul zooming down the road in their Porsche. Clyde notices Paul's the sort of mark on Paul's palm. Paul says, "Don't worry about it." Clyde doesn't worry about it. The pendant, the noise that comes from the pendant when it's used, sounds like, right? This is going to be a weird one. Sounds like Sans from Undertale. I don't know why, but when they use the pendant, it goes like, and you're like, what? Of all noises in the world, that's just bizarre. That one, completely like threw me for a loop. But like that's not an issue with the show. That's just an issue with me hearing this sound elsewhere. But it's just really weird. But Paul glimpses himself in the rearview mirror with sort of veins all over his face, and his eyes are pale, and he's snarling. But that's not how he looks in the real world, like at the moment. There's so many mirrors in the show, and so many like mirrors showing you somebody to communicate with, or someone's that's like not there in the real world. They just love doing that on the show. So Maria reads off from the Unit website that the Norse berserkers were actually aliens that had these pendants. One of these pendants has survived this long. It was last sighted at an army barracks that was destroyed in 1940, which was on the site where they now built the school. So, of course, when they put the pipes in, they dig it up and they found the pendant. She says that if you use it too much, you become irreversibly changed, and it's implied that you become something kind of furry and animal-like. Because Luke says, like, when Rani isn't 100% sure what a berserker is, Luke says that they would wear animal skins and everything, and Maria says that these berserkers didn't actually wear animal skins, but they were just changed into something that the people at the time couldn't recognize. It's a bit weird the way that's worded, but I guess it kind of implies that you become animalistic if you use the thing too much. Maybe it's a translation thing down the line. You know, at the time, whatever Norse person wrote down, they become like an animal, and then over time, it's changed into they wear animal skins or whatever. But who cares at the moment? You know, not massively relevant. Alan uses Unit to track Clyde's phone, which is a pretty good use of it actually. Not too crazy far fetched. You could totally, if you hack into Unit, probably use that to track his phone. That's pretty cool. But you know, there's the fact that he's managed to hack into Unit that we just have to go along with. We got lots more of like the whooshing around as we get a shopping montage, right, of Paul convincing people to give Clyde all the clothes and like whatever he wants. With "Do You Want to See the World" by the Kooks playing. The BBC has got all these music licenses, right? So they can do that. They can just put the music in these shows. But they tend to hold off a bit in Sarah Jane Adventures. The only thing I can really recall is when they had that song that I can't remember now, but it was like when Alan did the thing, and then Maria went back in time, and it was like the song was being played through time. They had that one, but I can't remember much other music that's being played in this show. So it just seems really funny that we've got two across this two-parter. We've got Grace Kelly by Mika on the radio, and now we've got just, for the purposes of the montage, just playing some music as well. Paul has changed into a nice-looking suit. He's got Clyde a leather jacket, some sunglasses, got him a guitar. They're just getting all the stuff. They've piled tons of stuff into the boot of the car. Paul glances in the reflection in the car window, his sort of evil version with all the veins all over him, and he's a bit shocked by it. But then they drive off, leaving a parking warden ripping up his parking tickets, which is quite a nice image. I quite enjoy that. I don't know if doing CGI on reflections is harder, but it looks quite good. Maybe it's makeup, but it looks more CG to me. Ronnie and Luke run to Carla's house, and they say, Paul's taken Clyde. You need to drive after him. And so they do, with Maria on the phone, sort of giving the guiding, giving the tracking. Very nice and action-packed, this. They leave Haresh just doing push-ups on the driveway because there's nothing they can do to help him. And we see that Clyde is seeming perhaps a little bit kind of unfulfilled, right? He's just seeming a bit like, oh, I've got all this nice stuff, but I'm still a bit down. So Paul gets him to speak his mind by using the pendant on him, using the medallion. I call it medallion a lot, but then especially in part 2, they start calling it a pendant, and I'm not sure if they do that in part 1, but it's a pendant medallion. It's the same thing. And Clyde is still wondering exactly why Paul left. So they pull up the car, and Paul repeats, right, I wasn't getting along with your mum, that was it. We have a very heartfelt moment from Clyde where he says, like, it was like you died. I woke up and you were completely gone, and I was scared that I was going to wake up and Mum would be gone too. I'd be all alone. Huge props for the performance and emotion there, especially from this character that is so often the Joker. We sort of see that maybe he's adopted this joking personality as a bit of a coping mechanism. And I've said before, I'm not sure how much character there was to him, and it's as if they've heard me, because this episode is all about exploring the emotional depth of Clyde. It's very good. So Paul says, okay, I want to make it up to you. And he does so by using the pendant to get him to forget that Paul ever left him and forget how that made him feel. And then he says, okay, Clyde, I'm gonna take you somewhere. It's gonna be a surprise. And when Clyde sort of reiterates what he said before, it's like, we shouldn't have secrets. He says, okay, no, fine, I'll tell you. We're gonna get a yacht, and we're gonna sail all the way around the world. We're gonna just visit anywhere we want to visit. It's gonna be brilliant. And when Clyde says, okay, look, it sounds brilliant, but should phone my mum, should tell her at least that's what's going on. Paul says, forget about her. This medallion is like one of the most powerful objects on the planet. I'm just going to point that out, right? I know it consumes you in the end, but if you use it sparingly enough, you can influence so many things. You can completely control people to forget things, to just rewrite their memories, to get them to do what you want. This is such an insanely powerful object, and it's incredibly unethical to use it on anyone, right? It's just crazy that it's just suddenly turned up here, right? There's also so many noises that sound like sounds from Undertale. It's kind of off-putting, but gloss over that, it's fine. It's just a weird quirk of the show. The veins, by this point, have spread right up Paul's arm. Clyde gets a call from Mum, but of course he doesn't answer because he doesn't have a clue what this Mum contact in his phone is. Paul says, hey, it doesn't even matter anyway, it's just us now. This is almost like a good Doctor Who plot, right? Pretty solid sci-fi pendant, pretty legitimate threat of it, but it focuses on how it affects some great characters with a lot of deep emotion. They've toned down a lot of the camp silliness to showcase how good the show can really be, and I like it a lot. Possibly, even, the best episode so far, if it can stick the landing. Okay? That's high praise. but I really think this is a good one. So, Luke has got Carla's sat nav in the car, and Alan from Washington has sort of hacked it to make it focus exactly on where Clyde is and direct them. With Ronnie sort of relaying the info from Maria and Alan on the phone. When Carla asks what exactly is going on, Ronnie says, "Oh, she's on the phone to one of Luke's geeky mates from school who figured out how to upgrade the GPS in science club." Blah blah blah. Carla buys it, probably a bit too distracted worrying about Clyde. And then Alan on the other end of the phone is like, "Oh, cheers for calling me a geeky mate. Thanks for that." But it's just a neat little moment. Alan says, "Okay, right, promise me, okay, you will contact Sarah Jane as soon as possible because Paul could be a legitimate danger from what I've read about this medallion. Um, so just do that as soon as you can. Contact her, please do that. Promise me you'll do that." And he wonders sort of what else he can do because he's all the way in America. But Maria says, "Oh well, I've got a plan." She doesn't reveal what the plan is, but she's got a plan. By this point, Paul and Clyde have got to the marina type thing, whatever, where they're trying to go and get this yacht. But Paul is clutching his arm in pain by this point, and Clyde notices. Carla, Luke, and Ronnie are in pursuit, and the veins crawl up Paul's face. It seems to be like CGI that reveals makeup, right? Like this blue light kind of crawls up his face, and it shows then the makeup of the veins that are left behind below, if that makes any sense. Clyde, he runs for help now. He sees Carla's car pull up. Of course, doesn't recognize her, but runs up to her begging, "Can you help?" Carla confronts Paul, asking, "What have you done to Clyde? Why doesn't he remember who I am?" Sees the veins all over Paul's face with his pale eyes as he sort of awkwardly staggers around, breathing heavily, and he screams, "What's happening to me?" And when Rani tells him, "You need to take off this pendant because it's overpowering you," he says, "Nobody will stop me, or I'm going to make you all walk into the sea and drown." He grabs Clyde. He says, "This is my soldier, and the whole world is going to follow my command." And it's just clear that he's completely lost it at this point. Enter Sarah Jane, with a heroic fanfare as well to boot. Clyde, of course, recognizes her, because Paul never made him forget her, runs to her, very confused. "I don't understand what's happening," that's what he's saying. Sarah Jane is just the best immediate comforting presence. She takes Clyde's hand, she reassures him that his mum and friends here, even though he doesn't know who they are, they're on his side. And she says, "Okay, we're going to help your dad now." It's very quick, but she's just 100% the one that you trust. Even though she hasn't been in this episode much, this is the Sarah Jane Adventures. She's come in, she's taken over, she knows what to do now. So they try talking to Paul. They say, "Hey, look, this is Clyde, right? You love Clyde, right?" He says, "I need him as a soldier for the war." We don't know what war, but he's just kind of talking nonsense. When Clyde says, "Look, take off the pendant, please. Turn yourself back." He says, "Look, it's better being a berserker. I don't have any of these human faults." And he's definitely acting a lot more beast-like, just sort of in the way that he moves. Because sort of as a human, he was very overconfident and everything, and quite a big physical presence. But now he's sort of more creeping around, sort of more hunched over a bit. And where it was sort of perhaps a bravado that he put on that was hiding a bit of a fear of inadequacy, now it's just the sense that if you get too close to him, he will be more of a physical threat. He may well tear you apart. So he's a bit like a cornered animal, right? Great acting from him. Clyde goes up to him and he says, "Remember taking me to the park as a kid?" Which Clyde actually, when Paul brought it up in part one, Clyde said he couldn't remember that. But now, obviously, he knows that his dad did. So he's trying to get him to remember. And then he says, "Okay, right, remember earlier when you taught me to say Ishaisa Clyde Langer?" Carla chimes in, saying, "Remember how you felt about me when we first met?" We get flashbacks to all these scenes, including the baby Clyde from the picture, who was on the swings in the park. And Paul sort of snarls as he remembers each thing. Sarah Jane pulls out a mirror. She shows him what he looks like and says, "Look, this is not really how you want to be, is it? we get a flashback to very baby Clyde. Paul says, I remember, and then he writhes around on the floor as the veins recede. He grabs the medallion from around his neck, he throws it away, it lands, there's a bit of a flash. We see Haresh collapse in the driveway and just gasp and pour the water all over himself. We see the man at the car dealership suddenly wonder where the car went. Clyde turns to Carla and Luke and Rani, now able to remember who they are again, hugs his mum. Sarah Jane hugs Luke and Rani. Clyde goes to help his dad off the ground. Sarah Jane reveals that Maria's plan was to get Alan to hack into the NHS, which, to be fair, has been done, so. And get a message to her to tell her to get to them as soon as possible. I don't know where Tarminster is, but she got to them pretty sharp. She got to them pretty damn quick. So she really put her foot down to get there. And then when Clyde says, Sarah Jane, what do I do with this medallion? Sarah Jane says, you know what to do with it. So he sits down by the water with his family and he says, we're all together now. And Paul says, well, we're not really, because I'm not meant to be with Carla. And Clyde considers using the medallion and says, I could make you fall in love with her then. And Paul says, yeah, but it'd be like, if history will repeat itself, I'd fall out with her again and end up leaving. And Clyde says, well, I could use the medallion to keep you together. And Carla says, no, I'd much rather love someone for real, thanks, and goes back to the car. And Clyde sits there with Paul, and Paul apologizes, saying, he ran back to Clyde, actually, because Mel is pregnant, and it reminded him of how he messed it all up with Clyde, and, I'm a bad father, you don't need me. And Clyde says, you know what? You're right, I don't need you. I've got my mum, and I've got a family here with the gang. So he hugs his dad goodbye, says, look, you've got a new family now, this is your new chance, try not to mess it up. Gives him the jacket back, says, return this, please. And return all the stuff in the car, the guitar you got, return the car as well. We get the feeling that he will, and he drives away. Carla goes back to Clyde and says, what's the deal with this medallion and all the veins that are all over your dad's face and everything? What's going on? How are you tied up in this? I can't cope with, knowing that you're in danger. I want you to be safe. And he says, yeah, I want you to be safe as well. And he turns and he uses the pendant on her and makes her forget about everything, and then takes it and he throws it into the sea. We'll gloss over, about, the pendant, and if you need to keep it in your possession for its effects to keep working, and how all that works, and what the actual rules of the pendant are, because the poignancy of the moment of throwing that pendant into the sea is a lot more important. So, okay. But, what I can't get over is throwing it into the sea seems to be what Sarah Jane implied when she said, you know what to do with this, right? He's by the sea, he's got the pendant in his hand, you know what to do with it, throw it, get rid of it. But that is a little bit irresponsible, right? I know her attic isn't the safest place. And even wherever it's kept, it'll always call to people and they'll have to resist the temptation of using it. And that's it's the only way to really get rid of it is to get rid of it. But surely throwing it into the sea is just waiting for it to wash up again and wreak havoc on somebody else's life. Is this not what UNIT is for? Sarah Jane has contacts in UNIT. They have the Black Archive with a super secret, secure memory wiping thing, so that even the people that work there think it's their first day, just all the time, so they don't remember anything that's in there. This is the best place for it. And sure, UNIT will shut down, kind of, possibly, in the show it kind of shut down, but then they made a game where they said, oh, well, there's a little branch of it that's still alive, but whatever. But, they don't know it's going to shut down at the time. At the very least, it's going to be 100% secure in there for another 12 or so years, right? And, at the time that the program is set, that is the best place for it that Sarah Jane could have done. And there's just there's a slight irresponsibility to Sarah Jane, even in the first episode when there's that alien that she's talking to just outside in her garden. And the show just sort of seems to imply that it's totally fine. But, while I'm at it, I think the ending where they get Paul to confront who he really is and sort of overcome the medallion's power is stronger than laughing at a clown or, breaking the circle of Secrets of the Stars or whatever. But I think it could have been stronger, and I think it was all resolved a bit quick. I think there was so much build up in this episode that the resolution sort of didn't quite hit the same height as it. And that being said, I think this episode was less about the alien stuff, and it was a lot more about Clyde and his family. And if having that shorter conclusion allows them that bit of time at the end for Clyde to sort of reconcile with them, maybe that was worth it. It does feel a bit weird, Paul just driving off at the end. He did bad things, and, it's just sort of, we let him go. There is the question of how much of that was the influence of the medallion, and how much of it was actually him being a bad person. But, we get the feeling that he's a changed man, at least. But, it's just a little bit, it's still, even so, that's a little bit quick, and I'd like some more resolution to my Sarah Jane episodes, please. We need one with a really good ending to actually make it a really good episode. But at least this one, while not perfect, certainly did have some very, very good moments in it that I enjoyed a lot. But we're not actually done yet, so we end back at 13 Bannerman Road, with Sarah Jane taking down all the post-it notes. Clyde comes in to apologise for ever, even bringing Paul up into the attic. And Sarah Jane says, well, you know what? Had my dad turned up, I'd probably have done the same to try and impress him, even though, she can't remember her parents very much because she was a baby when they died. And Clyde says, a lot of the time, people think that I'm sort of unbothered by everything, and there's probably quite a lot of my dad in me. And if it wasn't for hanging with the gang and everyone, I might turn out a bit more like him. So, thank you for your influence on me, and I think you will make me stronger. And Sarah Jane says, you know what, you don't even need to be cool all the time. It's fine. And you underestimate how strong you are on your own, how much of that actually comes from yourself. And so he says thank you to her, and she says, right, get on home. I'll see you tomorrow. And it's just so nice that she doesn't even blame him, right? She just unconditionally supports him when he needs it, and it's very lovely. And I love how much Sarah Jane looks out for Clyde. It's really nice. This is one of her shining moments. And then she sits there, and she's alone in her attic, and she pulls out a picture of her parents and takes a look at it, and we roll the credits. And next time, well, she might actually get to meet those parents indeed, with the help of someone that I'm going to call an old friend. I use the word friend in the broadest possible sense. I'll see you then. Bye.